Hey Theo, it's April 28th, 2020, and last night the Pentagon released a video of what people are saying is a UFO. And the funny thing about that is the world didn't even blink. The world was like, all right, that's just 2020. Look at the sourdough bread I made. And that's kind of how crazy things are, which I mean, I guess it's just interesting that every year we're like, this can't possibly top anything that we've seen. It continues to. So I think that's pretty good statement. UFOs, and people are just kind of like, because of course. Let's see. I wrote things down because you had questions. But first I wanted to answer your question about the scale of things. I think that there's not a whole lot to say here, I guess, other than basically scale is a variable when we think about or when we evaluate things. And so I think that recognizing scale as a variable is the first step to sort of figuring out what that means for different things. I think a really my default is always time. Is this if a decision is a big deal, is it a 5-hour thing, a 5-day thing, 50-year, that kind of evaluation of things is just important, I think. And on different levels too, scale primarily with relation to our own lifetimes is kind of important, because this kind of is jumping ahead to, I think you asked about the 30-year time horizon for climate change and stuff. And I do think that humans kind of have this problem of we don't live long enough to make use of the things that we've learned in a way that's so powerful, because we've experienced it, even 100 years ago, totally different generation, and we can learn from those things that happened, and we are with things like this pandemic and stuff, but particularly for things like climate change, until we feel the impact so personally, of us living it, it's just really hard to understand the weight of that and to internalize this with regard to the scale of our lifetime versus the scale of humanity. Another small example of the scale thing is when babies cry, right? They're crying when they're hungry, because that's literally the worst thing they've ever felt before in their entire life. So I say oh my god, it's a luxury to be bored, but this pandemic is crazy. It's the craziest thing. It's the craziest thing because it's one of the, I've never experienced something like this before. So the scale of my own life, this is blown way out of proportion, but the scale of other things, not that big of a deal. Anyway, let's see, what else? I think that the layers of sentience and consciousness is really interesting. I love thinking about that. I think your point about there being different layers of sentience and consciousness and stuff, I think that that's really interesting. And one of the things that I think about a lot is kind of your point of different cells in our bodies have maybe different levels of consciousness, but can only experience that layer. I have two things about that. One is, I do think that it's interesting that people have noticed before that the way that we experience, or the things that we experience in the universe, we're kind of, to some weird degree, in the middle of, the scale that we understand, we're kind of in the middle of, there are things way bigger than us and way smaller than us. And that's just, an interesting, comment on these, different layers that you pointed out. And two, I think that it's interesting to think about this because, you said, countries having a personality or something, basically. What about the planet, in the same way that, you said, all of our cells maybe have are more individual than we think of them, but in this scenario, planet Earth as an organism, as our society as an organism, in Brave New World, another future looks at society where we literally have humans basically bred for different purposes, that kind of matches this idea of planet or species as one large organism, especially in the context of aliens, then it's planet Earth is this thing that everybody has a role or something. And then my question is what is the brain of that? who or what, like what does that look like, you know? Like I think that our understanding of computational power is so different now than it was 15 years ago. Like this concept of a central decision maker beyond one human being or beyond like a single brain, I think is really interesting. Okay, let's see, you had questions too, and I'm gonna answer them, and then I want to know what you think too. But I also have a question for you after this. The cars, the autonomous thing, like I think that as far as autonomous cars go, like I think about the tubes that they travel through in Futurama, and like to this point of like us being like an organism as a species, like it's basically like how can we solve this problem of people needing to get places. And I do think that like removing like exposure to risk through things like, you know, human emotions or what, like I don't know, things like that, I think is probably like a good thing. I do think I'm, you know, again drawn to the ethics of like who is creating the algorithms that make the decisions of like what to optimize for and who to save in these situations, because I think that the effects that they have, you know, will just continue and, you know, be felt years and years in the future. So I think that's really interesting and important that we're deliberate about it. And I'm not sure that there's like a right answer either, but that's at least what I'm thinking about as far as like autonomous cars go. I think it sounds pretty cool. The best state in the USA, well, obviously, like, I really like Washington. I don't know. I haven't been to that many states, I guess. I've been to more, like, countries than I have states, which is funny because, like, I saw this tweet that was like, I don't even know if Arkansas exists. Like, I can't confirm. And I'm like, honestly, yeah. Like, I can't confirm that it exists. So, you know, get back to me if you've been there or something. But I think that's funny. Yeah, I do like Washington, though, for all the different, like, nature, you know, cool stuff. I grew up here. I think it's pretty fun. It has nice air. Seattle has good air and good water, and I'm really fortunate to, like, you know, live here. My favorite day of the week is probably, like, Tuesday. I like its color. I have synesthesia, and Tuesday is a very nice blue, and it's the nicest color of all the days of the week. I also think that it's nice, like, when people, like, don't like Monday, they might like Tuesday a little bit better, and they still have that early week energy, which is cool. My favorite sound, I don't know. I do think that I find like voices of people that I like. I think that's very like comforting and like nice. So maybe that. Speaking of which, I thought it was adorable that you wanted to talk about the things that we like about each other, and I wanted to say that I love that you are really good at like both listening and asking questions, like in a way that I think shows that you're really thinking deeply about things, like with the specificities of one person's interest, like the person that you're talking to in mind. I think that's like a very like unique quality, actually. Like I think that a lot of people end up thinking and talking just to think and talk for themselves, and I've always loved that, like when we have conversations, we're able to just sort of talk about whatever, and you're always very non-judgmental and curious and inquisitive, and I also just love that you're willing to have a good time, you know. Like I think that I used to take things like more seriously, and you know that, of like all the people, you know, and I've always gravitated towards like your sense of not necessarily like yes everything's gonna be okay, but like it kind of doesn't matter because like you have the things that do matter in life. And I think that I've always admired how you work to like figure things out about yourself. Like you just don't give up even if things like don't go perfectly the first time, which I think is like, you know, resilience is like the most valuable skill that we can have, and I just love ya, so there's that too. And let's see, I think that was it, but I want to know your answers to those questions, and I wanted to ask if you had to plan like something like a meal or like a food plan for yourself that you had to live by for the rest of your life, and like, you know, something like an arbitrary like constraint, like okay, 20 ingredients or less or things, like how would you even start, like how would you go about that? I'm really curious. So anyway, thanks, and I'll talk to you soon.